Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program we ran on. And as you might be able to tell from the background, I'm in the Dnipro Ukrainian Cultural Center in Buffalo, New York, where they're having a big commemoration, cultural events, food, and so forth on occasion of the fourth anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And with me is Matthew Zawiski, who's with the center. I've known Matt for about almost 25 years. He was one of the people that worked with Ralph Nader, arranged meetings for Nader's campaign here in 2004, and then my campaign for governor of New York in 2010. Upstairs, we're downstairs in the children's room, but upstairs there's a beautiful hall where these events happen, and Ralph introduced me in 2010 to the audience here. So we're going to be talking mostly about Ukraine for the first part of this program, but we got to say something about Iran. You know, crazy Trump just started another war with Israel against Iran, which is going to do no good for the people of Iran. They don't care about human rights and democracy in Iran. It's about U.S. domination of the Middle East and the oil, and it's not just the oil in Iran and other parts of the Middle East. It's about the price of oil. This is going to jack up the oil price, going to make shale oil in the United States more profitable to drill. And for Russia, who's been hurting in the last year because of low global oil prices, it's going to raise oil prices and help finance his war machine. And of course, Trump is aligned with Putin, so there are a lot of geopolitical reasons why this war is going on. And, you know, we can get to that. The only thing I'll say now is there are going to be votes in both the Senate and the House this week on War Powers resolution to stop Trump. And so Congress have opportunity for Congress to say no war. And we got to get our senators and representatives to vote for that. So if you do nothing else, contact your senators and representatives and tell them to vote for these War Powers Act resolutions to stop this war. And I'm sure a lot of you are going to want to talk about Iran, given what started this morning. But let's talk about, you know, what we're doing here on the fourth anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Iran.
Of Ukraine.
Yeah, of Ukraine. Let's put the first link up, which will tell you about the program that's going on here at the Dnipro Ukrainian Cultural Center, which has involved films. We were just watching 2,000 Meters to Andriivka, which is, you know, it was an Oscar documentary film shortlist. It's really, you want to know what the frontline battle is like. It's up close and personal, hard to watch. Earlier, we had a panel with people who are fighting in Ukraine, you know, videoing in. And later, Nina's Eyes, which is a short film, and I'll be actually interviewing the filmmaker, Lucia Costello, and later they got music. So you can look at that program and, you know, excuse me, I'm still recovering from that cold. You know, see the graphics. So that'll tell you about it. And then also just put this in there on the menu for the food. I mean, when I was in Ukraine, I really enjoyed the borscht. A lot of pierogis. Did I say that right?
Pierogi,
Yeah.
But in Ukrainian we call them varenika.
Okay. Well, anyway, they got them and some other food. So
We call them.
I'm looking forward to that. That's this evening.
Ralph also liked the borscht when he was here.
Yeah. Well,
He had the borscht and the varenika.
good choice. So Matthew, you know, you can say more about what's going on today. Also, tell people about your shirt. That's a traditional Ukrainian shirt, and you know.
Yeah, we call it a vyshyvanka, and it's traditional Ukrainian shirt. It's which is sort of just being very proud in your country. We like to wear these at certain occasions, and it's it's just a shirt that really brings a lot of joy for a country that's for such a long time has been sort of looking for sovereignty and an identity that is protected. So I think this shirt represents that in a aesthetic way.
Yeah, and it's embroidered. And I marched in the climate march with Svetlana Romanko, who's been on the podcast. She's with Razum We Stand, which is campaigning to strengthen fossil fuel sanctions on Russia and rebuild Ukraine on the basis of renewable energy. And the organizers put her with the indigenous people, mostly North American indigenous nations. And a lot of those people were coming up to her and saying, "What nation are you from? What tribe are you from?" Because Svetlana's got dark hair, dark brown eyes. She could pass for a indigenous American, and she would say Ukraine. And the indigenous people say, "Oh yeah, we get it, land back," because they're fighting to get land back, and so are the Ukrainians. So, everybody, a lot of people at this event today are wearing these shirts. It's a traditional Ukrainian shirt. So Matt was one of the original signers of the mission statement, mission statement of the Ukrainian Solidarity Network. And we've talked a lot about, doing an event like this. So why don't you say more about, what's going on today and who's here?
Well, this is almost like a typical weekend at Dnipro, where we have live music, we have speakers. Just a month ago, we had a group in New York working on plastics, trying to stop the plastic problem. And we have a credit union here. We have a children's Ridno Skola, which is a school. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is the credit union's calendar. So you got a Ukrainian civilian turned soldier. And I'll just show you a couple of pictures. First one is a Ukrainian woman assembling a drone. It's the first thing they got on their calendar. That's for January. For February, a demonstration to support Ukraine. And then the third month, a statue of Taras Shevchenko, who is sort of the national hero of Ukraine. He was a mid-19th century poet and painter. He'd been born a serf. He was taken by his owner to Moscow and was developed into a great painter. So the artist community in Moscow bought his freedom. I mean, serfdom in Ukraine was not much different than chattel slavery in the United States. So, serfs were tied to the land. They could be bought and sold. And Taras, his freedom was bought, and he became the national poet of Ukraine. Wrote in the Ukrainian language at a time when the Russian Empire discouraged it. The Russian Empire regarded Ukrainians as, ignorant peasants who spoke a pidgin Russian, not their own language. And Putin still has that attitude. Shevchenko made friends with a Black American Shakespearean actor who was born to a free Black preacher in New Orleans, but couldn't practice his craft in the United States in the 1830s and 40s. So he made friends. Well, he was a Shakespearean actor in Europe, and when he came to, I don't know if they met, I think they met in Moscow, but maybe it was Kyiv. Taras Shevchenko was so taken with this guy. They became great friends, common experience, slavery and serfdom, and, a passion for freedom. And so Shevchenko, who was not only the national poet, but also a great painter, painted a famous portrait of this Black Shakespearean actor from America. In any case, Shevchenko, that picture I showed you is from a statue in Kazakhstan. We have one in Syracuse. They're all over. So when anybody says or parrots, Putin's lies about Ukraine being an artificial nation. Tell them about Taras Shevchenko.
There's a famous statue of Shevchenko in Washington, near Georgetown. And in the I think Eisenhower, it was put up during the Eisenhower administration. And we used to take pilgrimages there with Ukrainians just to visit the statue after it was built, I think in 58 or 59. So if you're ever near the, what is it, P and 25th, go check out the beautiful Shevchenko statue in Washington, D.C.
Okay, I interrupted you. You mentioned the credit union. What else is going on here?
Well, we have a school for children to learn to better learn the language because many refugees are here right now in Buffalo, and the school is a great way for people to keep connected. We have a sportsman's club where they do hunting, and we have a cabin that's this Ukrainian cabin, sort of in the southern tier of New York. Well, we have a credit union that we mentioned. Specifically this weekend is the 4-year anniversary of the invasion by Russia. And earlier in the week, we actually had what would you call it? We turned Niagara Falls blue and yellow. So we had a demonstration at Niagara Falls, and they changed the colors under the falls so it projected blue and yellow into the falls. And it was a beautiful sight. I was not there, but many were. So that's just one of the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the activities of the diaspora.
And so how is the diaspora feeling now that Trump is in office and is allied with Putin?
Yeah, many are very disappointed in Trump, though, traditionally Ukrainians were sort of conservative Republicans. So Trump really had them, I guess, flip, or at least they're disgusted with Trump. They're willing to see that as a smear on Trump, who is a Republican. So many have seen through, but still some are supportive of Trump because of his other issues that they like. But I would say most have flipped against him in the Ukrainian community.
Yeah, being at the table today, almost everybody that stopped by to talk, I got the Ukrainian Solidarity Network literature out and some books and whatnot. Everybody's shaking their head about Trump. What a jerk from their point of view, throwing the Ukrainians into the claws of Putin and selling their country out. So I'll be interviewing, couldn't do it now, but I'll be interviewing one of the filmmakers.
Lucia Costello.
Right.
He's a local Ukrainian and is a tour de force herself. So the later interview that Howie and I will be doing is with Lucia and another sort of Buffalo of Ukraine to show more specifically what Buffalo Ukrainians are doing for the diaspora and defending Ukraine's sovereignty.
So that's what we're doing here today. If people want to ask questions about some of the events in that list we linked to, do that. I'm hungry. We can talk about the food on the menu.
Yeah.
I can tell you how much I love the borscht. Or you can ask about Iran. I mean, let's see, what you guys want to talk about. So we should have, here we go, Scout 164. Regarding Ukraine, what thoughts do you have for the Russian government finally having a budget deficit of at least $19 billion? Also, the Flamingo finally struck an explosive factory. The Flamingo being a Ukrainian-made long-range ballistic missile that is, just coming out, and apparently it's accurate enough to hit that factory. You want to start with any reaction?
That's just more your forte.
Okay, yeah, I'm the policy one. Well, Russia, if you go to the, we should put this in the chat. I'll get that up in a minute. The statement was released Tuesday. So yeah, you guys haven't seen it. Ukraine Solidarity Network has a statement out called Ukraine Still Stands. And that means the Russian narrative of inevitable victory is false. They've only gained, the Russians, 1.5% of Ukraine in the last 3 years of constant offensives, even though they've been losing about 400,000 Russian troops in those 2 years, each year. They are now losing about 30,000 troops a month, which is more than they lost in the whole 10 years of the war in Afghanistan. Russia's been attacking Ukraine longer than it took the Soviet Union, with a big push from Ukrainians who lost over 10 million people in that war to push Hitler's Nazi army all the way back to Berlin. In less time than Russia's been attacking Ukraine now. So that's where that statement, takes off from, and we'll get that linked up in the chat. So in the last year, the oil and gas sanctions plus lower global prices for oil have meant that Russia's war machine funding, which largely comes from oil and gas, has been really hurt. The revenues are down 50%. Now that's really important. Over the last decade, 30 to 50% of Russia's annual budget has come from oil and gas exports. And 40% of the Russian budget, think about that, 40% of the whole national budget of Russia is for the military. So the militarism and the depth of commitment to militarism in Russia is off the charts. And when the oil and gas revenue doesn't come in, they can't fuel and fund their war machine. The problem is, as I mentioned at the top, this war in Iran is probably going to jack up oil prices on the world market, which means increased revenue for Russia, as well as Trump's oil buddies, who will be able to drill for more shale oil because it'll become profitable. So there's nothing good about the Iran war for Ukraine. So I'm trying to remember the question. Did I cover it all? It was, and the flamingo.
The flamingos, yeah.
Yeah, the flamingo, it's just a testament to how innovative Ukraine has been. And actually, in the old Soviet Union, Ukraine was the center of weapons production. A lot of that knowledge is still in Ukraine, and they put it to use. So now, the U.S., Biden was hesitant to give them ballistic missiles. Trump has cut 99% of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. So Ukraine has had to rely on itself. And go ahead.
Just kind of a friendly amendment, Howie. The nuclear issue is a big one, and the Budapest Memorandum connected to that. I think it's good to refresh people's memories as to how Ukraine had all these nuclear missiles in the country, and then they signed the Budapest Memorandum, and then that was sort of supposed to protect Ukraine. Do you want to give a refresher on that? I know that's a common talking point.
The U.S. and Russia pushed really hard for Ukraine to give up the nuclear weapons it inherited from the Soviet Union and give them to Russia. And the other side of the deal was Ukraine would join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it would not go nuclear. And the other side of the deal was Russia, the U.S., and the UK, I guess, promised security guarantees to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And then the French and the Chinese later signed on to that. And of course, when Russia started invading and taking land in 2014, and now after the full-scale invasion in 2022, the US, France, and the UK didn't provide security guarantees. They sent them some weapons. And of course, the Chinese ducked, and the Russians violated it directly. And that was, the Russians Putin says, well, we had the Ukrainians ready to sign a peace agreement in March 2022, which isn't true. But in that draft that Putin has, pointed to, it required the disarmament, basically, of Ukraine. And, Ukraine wasn't going to sign off on that because they want to be able to protect themselves from another Russian invasion. And everybody says, well, Boris Johnson went there at the behest of Biden and the West, saying, we don't want a peace agreement, we want to fight. What Boris Johnson actually said is, we will not give you security guarantees, but we'll send you or sell you weapons, and you can fight. And for the Ukrainians, it's like, well, we're going to have to fight because we're not going to have the West backing us up if the Russians reinvade. So that's, one of those tropes that continually is put out there by, naive pacifists and sinister geopoliticians, campus, who want Ukraine to surrender to Russia's demands. And at this point, how many more hundreds of thousands of people do you want to give to Russia? 200,000 in Donetsk, all the people in the city of Zaporizhia. You want to give them Kherson back, the city of Kherson that was liberated by the Ukrainians at the end of 2022. I mean, how many people do you want to give back to the oppression of the Russian occupation, plus the land? How disarmed do you want Ukraine to be, which is one of Russia's demands? And how unable do you want Ukraine to be to rely on allies and partners to help them defend themselves? Zelensky and the Ukrainians, if you look at public opinion polls, are willing to compromise. They're willing to say, okay, we'll freeze the current battle lines and have peace at that point, and then, leave up for the long-term negotiations over the status of the occupied territories. And they're willing to forego NATO ascension if they get comparable security guarantees. And that's what the West will not provide. Nobody will provide. So Ukraine's got to provide it for itself. And that's why they're developing missiles like the Flamingo and all this drone warfare. And, there's one report, I don't know how true it is, but it certainly is, I think, indicative of the ratios. 25 Russians to 1 Ukrainian killed on the battlefields in the last year. The Ukrainians are playing defense. The Russians keep assaulting with suicidal meat wave attacks. And as I said, they're losing more people every month than they lost in their whole 10-year war against Afghanistan. So that's a long answer to your question, Scout 164, but there you have it. Yeah.
What about Howie, Georgia and Kazakhstan? Was there a similar Budapest memorandum for those two countries at the time? I know Kazakhstan also had. Yeah,
Kazakhstan had some nuclear weapons. They were part of the deal. They didn't have as many as Ukraine. They have not yet been invaded by Russia, except when there was a popular uprising in January before Russia invaded Ukraine, where the dictator of Kazakhstan called in the Russian troops to put down a revolt by their oil workers, initiated by their oil workers, and then went, viral, popular across Kazakhstan. That was part of the Budapest memorandum, but the big thing is that, the US, the UK, Russia, and China, and France said, we'll make sure that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is protected. And when the Russians invaded, they all basically ghosted. Some of the Western countries said, well, we'll sell you arms or even send you arms, but we're not going to fight with you. Fight on your side against the Russian invasion. And so, Ukrainians, that's why they're moving to self-reliance militarily. Continued from Scout 164. Basically, instead of having it be a distraction war, so one could topple a government, it's being done so Trump can cancel elections and stop the release of the Epstein files. Now you're talking about Iran, I assume, and I don't think Trump can cancel elections. He can rig them with this voter ID thing, where you got to have a passport or a birth certificate to prove you're eligible to vote. They tried with the redistricting. They're trying to federalize the county. I don't think they're going to cancel elections. It's too obvious. They're going to rig them. That's what Trump is going to try to do. And yeah, distract from the Epstein files. The release is happening, and I think the Democrats and some Republicans in Congress really want to see those files. So I don't know if they can stop them. The Justice Department is obstructing, but I think that's digging a deeper hole for Trump. As they say, the cover-up's worse than the crime. Calvin Stevens, our citizens are dying on the street. Meanwhile, Trump is doing all this BS. Yeah, it's a pretty bad situation. I'm trying to think where we had U.S. citizens dying on the street caused by the U.S. government. We had it at Kent State and Jackson State in 1970 during the anti-Vietnam War protests.
There was just an example.
And the response was a national student strike.
Yeah.
You know, after that was, I think, in May 4th. And after that, classes everywhere canceled. And a lot of those students went down to Washington or other places to protest. We've had, good response from the people of Minneapolis to the Rachel Good and Alex Preddy murders, but still hasn't reached the level during the Vietnam War. And, we're getting at the point where it really needs to be. Some of our No Kings demos have been massive, but there were no concrete demands on the government, really. It was just, we don't like Trump. So we got to escalate our demands and our tactics and the size of these protests. You go ahead.
Do you want to mention the example we just got from Mrs. Prisbawa about the person at the Tim Hortons in Buffalo? I don't know if that's...
Yeah, another death here in Buffalo. Yeah. ICE picked up this man and then released him outside of Tim Hortons in the middle of the night when it was closed. He just had, what do you call those, slippers on?
Like hospital slippers?
Yeah, and he walked 5 miles, I guess, looking for warmth, and he died. ICE is responsible for that man's death. That's here in Buffalo. These goons are just lawless. I mean, that's why I've said we need to abolish ICE and Border Patrol, dismantle them, have the FBI anti-terrorism groups monitor these guys because they're dangerous, and then rebuild a immigration system that's humane, that helps immigrants and asylum seekers integrate into society. People coming here, overwhelmingly want to do good. They contribute. We know from the statistics, they have lower crime rates. They pay more in taxes than they get out in benefits once they become qualified for benefits, which they don't as, non-citizens for most benefits. So this whole, scare tactics by Trump and the gutless, spineless Democrats who kind of capitulate to that is we gotta reject all that and abolish ICE. Needs to be a serious program. And it's not just abolish ICE; it's replace it with a humane immigration system. Scott 164, I don't understand how Putin thinks banning Telegram while having a war with Ukraine will help. Isn't that just going to piss people off more? Yeah, but that's about controlling people. He may have to mobilize to get troops. He's not replacing his troops now. And he doesn't want the Russian people to be able to communicate with each other except through a state-provided platform called Max, which is totally surveilled by the Russian state. And anybody that wants to organize is not going to use that platform. So they're banning Telegram to ban the Russian people from talking to each other horizontally at the grassroots. And ironically, it's hurting military communications because a lot of their military people communicate on Telegram. But Putin's all about control, not really about effectiveness or efficiency. Calvin Stevens, the controlled opposition are mad about the banning of Telegram, yet aren't blaming Putin. Yeah, it's like they have this saying in Russia, good czar, bad boyars, subordinate, parts of the czarist hierarchy. And that's been a problem under monarchies for a long time. They elevate the monarch to, godlike status. So if something's going wrong, it's not him, it's somebody else. So Putin is screwing over the Russians, and then people appeal to Putin to fix things. Somebody's screwing us over. So yeah, controlled opposition and also just confused opposition. Vicky Corden, we need to stop flock cameras because ICE wants everyone under surveillance. Very disgusting. Yeah, that's the big issue with this AI contract with the Pentagon. They went from Anthropic to OpenAI, I think it's called, that does your chat GPT. And supposedly Anthropic was saying, we don't want our technology used for mass surveillance or autonomous weapons with no human control. And the report last night was that OpenAI is willing to meet those conditions. In other words, no mass surveillance, or let's put it this way, the Pentagon was willing to agree to no mass surveillance or autonomous weapons run by AI. But the reporting also said, we don't really know because we haven't seen the fine print on this deal. So the surveillance state is really a serious problem. We see it in Russia with the banning of Telegram, and we see it with the surveillance cameras and maybe this AI surveillance that's coming from the Pentagon. Calvin Stevens, Howie, is there a reason that a large portion of the Green Party have a pro-Russian stance? Made me scared to join the party for a long time. I think it's the same reason you see it in DSA, in the pacifist movement, the peace movement. It's a legacy, I think, of campism during the Cold War. Campism was like, you had to be in the camp of one or the other Cold War bloc. Excuse me. So people that favored the Soviet Union, the communist tradition, were in the Soviet bloc camp. And those who were anti-communist socialists, like the social democracies of Europe, the Democratic Party in the United States, they were in the Western camp, to the point where somebody like Michael Harrington really didn't come out against the war in Vietnam until McGovern ran in '72. Harrington was one of those liberals that said negotiate, not out now, which was the demand of the anti-war movement on the streets. So it's a legacy of that. When the Soviet Union fell apart and the US became the dominant unipolar power, a lot of people opposed to US imperialism decided we're in the camp of anybody in conflict with the US. Even if they're fascists, like, Assad in Syria, or Putin in Russia, or the clerical fascists running Iran, they call those states anti-imperialist, even though, in fact, they themselves are smaller imperialists, like Russia and Ukraine and Georgia and Transnistria, and not to mention their Africa Corps, the whole Wagner group in Africa, and the Iranians extending their power to Hezbollah and the militias they control in Iraq. Assad really couldn't get out of Syria. He was trapped by his own people, but he was certainly a fascist. And, I think the problem of people like, let's be blunt, Jill Stein was reluctant to criticize Putin and Assad before that. Because, she didn't want to be seen to be abetting US imperialism. But I would argue that you're not credible as a consistent anti-imperialist unless you call out all imperialisms, US, Russian, whoever's. And when we don't show solidarity, sympathy, and give moral and political support to our compatriots, people like us that are pro-democracy, pro-justice, pro-democratic rights, struggling against repressive regimes like Assad's Syria or Putin's Russia or the clerical fascists in Iran, then the people who are struggling in those countries look at the left and they say, they're not with us, so we're not on the left, or the left isn't an alternative for us. And that undermines us because we need a global left movement to overthrow, capitalism and the imperialisms it fosters. So I would just say, Calvin, that it's not just the Green Party. We struggle with it in the Green Party, but if you join DSA, you'd struggle with it there. You go to a peace group like Code Pink, you'll struggle with it there. It's a problem in the Western left, which I would say is the Western left's colonial mentality, because they don't listen to the grassroots people like in Ukraine or like in Iran who are struggling. They listen to the elites. Noam Chomsky, a good example. When the Russians did their full-scale invasion, he said, oh, well, Russia needs a warm water port in Sevastopol, as if justifying, the taking of Crimea. And ironically, Russia had 3 warm water ports on the Black Sea on Russian territory. They didn't need to seize Sevastopol in Crimea to have another warm water port. But Chomsky wasn't listening to the grassroots people. Turns out he was giving more agency to the Epstein class, the VIPs with rich.
What about someone like
connections.
Dr. Parenti, who's often just passed away, but is
Yeah.
often, is there anything to elaborate about his?
Yeah,
I don't know if he took a stance on this recently, but.
Yeah, Michael was a campus. I knew him. I worked with him. He was a candidate along with Bernie Sanders with the Liberty Union Party in the 70s, and I dropped leaflets for him. And then sometime in the 80s, Dartmouth College opened up the Rockefeller Center for the Social Sciences or Public Policy, and it was going to be dedicated by Henry Kissinger. So we organized a counter teach-in, and I brought Michael there. I can't remember exactly what his subject was. We got some Attica brothers to come, which I think really freaked out Kissinger, who then canceled. And, Michael and I argued about the nature of the Soviet state. He was enamored by their, social welfare programs, which were pretty good. They were probably as good as, the social democracies in Western Europe. But I was concerned that, the working class can't organize independently in the Soviet Union. The trade unions are controlled by the state.
But then there's someone like Jane McAlevey, who was there in the mid-'80s, and she was, according to her sort of video bio with Paul Jay, she went she was a guest of the Soviet Union in the mid-'80s and said as soon as she got there, she wanted to leave because she could just feel maybe the anti-democratic nature of the culture at the time. This is mid-'80s.
And being a trade unionist and organizer.
Yeah.
She saw that the unions there were not unions. They were agents of the state. So that was the difference I had with Michael. His critique of domestic, American political economy, the book Democracy for the Few, I would still recommend that people read that. That was like his book that he kept revising and updating. A lot of good information in there about how, the class structure of the United States undermines democracy and the political system as well as the benefits that the state ought to provide, public services it doesn't. Moon X-53, breaking news. As of 13 minutes ago, the supreme leader of Iran has been killed. Okay, well, Trump has said it's a regime change operation. I wonder if it's not a regime capture operation like I think Venezuela was, where you got rid of one titular leader but put the same power structure back in power, but put it in a position where it has to become a vassal of the United States, which tells you a lot about the Maduro regime and its cadre, if that's actually what has happened, which I think it is. In Iran, I don't know. They do say there was a succession plan worked out by the supreme leader, and who that is and whether they'll be able to take control. You know, the problem in Iran is that the pro-democracy movement, because of the repression, has had trouble organizing. Its strongest base is in independent unions, but they've been brutally repressed, including in this last round of protests. Can they take power? One of the problems in the '79 revolution was the left, including the Tudeh party, which was a communist party, and a lot of the other, the left Islamists, they all lined up with the Ayatollah Khomeini to get rid of the Shah. And they thought they could, you know, have a coalition with the Islamists. And when the Islamists consolidated power, they literally killed the left. These murdered thousands, hung them from the lampposts. So, you know, I hope the left in Iran has learned that lesson. But, you know, the struggle for power that may come about if there is a power vacuum, the prospects for the pro-democracy movement, let's just say they're difficult. You know, I don't know. I do know some. In fact, we've had Frida Afari on here before, and I was thinking the other day we need to get her back, particularly if there's an invasion. Now there is, so I may contact her tomorrow and see if she can come on next week, because she's in touch with people on the left, on the ground in Iran, and she has a lot to say. But yeah, I'm at this event. I haven't been following the news, but Aaron Ingebrigtsen, holy blank. Yeah, I mean, Trump is out of control, out of his mind, and a danger to the world. And so again, I appeal to people, you know, contact your senators and representatives and tell them to vote for this damn War Powers Act resolution to stop the war. Or at least say Congress wants to stop the war, which is constitutionally their power. But whether Trump will follow that, whether it goes to the courts, who knows? Well, we should be out in the streets as well. I'm sure there are already demonstrations going on. In fact, I know here in Buffalo, one of the Greens came by my table and said she was going to a demonstration at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So I'm sure some of you have already been out there or will be out there. Vicky Corden, Trump wants to change the regime in Cuba also, but he says he will do it peacefully. Trump should never be trusted. Yeah, and again, you know, Rubio seems to be the vanguard in that effort. He comes from a Cuban family that actually left Cuba before the revolution, but they were, you know, rich right-wingers. And they'd like to take power. I don't think that'll be popular with the Cuban people. So you know, we'll have to see what they got in mind. Right now, by denying Cuba oil, they are impoverishing, you know, really immiserating the ordinary people of Cuba, punishing them for something they didn't do, and hoping that they will, you know, rise up against the regime. You know, there were demonstrations a few years ago. There's a lot of discontent with the Cuban government, but if the Yankees are fomenting it, I think a lot of Cubans are going to say, Yankees go home, we'll take care of this ourselves. You know, we'll have to see. The other thing about Cuba, You could see the U.S. doing an on-land operation, unlike Iran, which is too damn big. But that could be messy. I think a lot of Cubans would fight back. So I'm just sort of speculating out loud. But yeah, Trump is, he loses more popularity at home, and he's going around the world doing crazy things, which is losing him more popularity around the world as well as at home. But I think he's full of himself, and he's going to try to do this stuff, and it's not going to end well. Not end well for him or the people he's bombing. Richard Pink, what are the odds that this will lead to a wider war with Russia, China, and North Korea? I don't see the Iran war leading to that. You know, Russia, like I said, it'll appreciate the higher oil and gas prices. China, you know, China is like, they're cautious in their foreign policy. They don't want to provoke. They want stability because they're doing business. They do have imperial ambitions, but they're not, you know, out of control like Trump. And in North Korea, I don't know why Kim would, you know, care one way or the other so much about Iran. They do some business. Iran probably gets some oil on the QT, but I don't see Kim risking his regime in a war with the U.S. over Iran. It's just not that important to them. So I think, you know, the wider war with those big nuclear powers is not so much of a problem. I think it's going to be but, you know, I don't know what Iran's done today. I heard reports they were attacking, you know, American military assets and some civilian assets in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, as well as Israel, and as well as what they believe were pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. So this is already spread to you know, half a dozen countries in the Middle East. That's the wider war, you know, I'm afraid of, because, and I don't know, people watching the news today may know more than me, but, you know, are the Saudis now going to say, okay, Iran attacked us, so we're going to attack back? Or are they going to say, we're not giving, you know, airspace or assistance to the U.S., leave us alone? You know, how's all that going to play out? You know, this could go, you know, a lot of different scenarios, but I think that's where the wider war danger is, just across the Middle East. Vicky Corden, Netanyahu has been looking forward to war against Iran. He is another cruel and dangerous troublemaker. Yeah, he is, he's cold-blooded, heartless. I mean, the way they treat the Palestinians, or anybody, you know, the Lebanese, that you know, gets in their way, or the Syrians, you know, they're still bombing Lebanon. You know, they still occupying southern Syria more than, you know, before Assad was pushed out. It's, you know, they're an imperial power. They, you know, and Netanyahu is supported by a fundamentalist Jewish right that believes the Bible tells them they have the right to everything from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates. And so that kind of ideological imperialism, as well as the militarism and the success militarily they've had, which feeds a nationalism, is a toxic mix. And you know, that's why we need serious sanctions on Israel by the international community, which so far has been gutless on that. You know, paper resolutions, but not the UN, through Uniting for Peace, could impose an arms embargo on Israel and send a military force in there to protect the Palestinians. That's what people like Craig Mokover has been calling for. You know, the former UN diplomat and official who is now He resigned over the failure of the UN to act on this. You know, that's another place where, you know, we need to keep pushing. I talked about this, you know, last fall. There were two efforts. One was called Lifeline for Palestine, which Jill Stein was involved in, and another coming out of England, I forget the name of it. They were calling for what Greg Buchheimer's been calling for. And it didn't happen in the UN General Assembly. You know, they basically signed off on the Board of Peace, which is Trump's real estate board for Gaza. It's terrible. So, yeah, I guess I'm just saying Netanyahu is just the face of a very dangerous religious and nationalist movement that has taken power in Israel. Calvin Stevens, sorry if this is unrelated to the main thing, but do you have any opinion on the California governor race? Butch Ware seems really good. Yeah, I think Butch is running a good campaign. I think most of his messaging is, you know, hitting the right tone. You know, I don't know Butch that well. I have some questions about some of his international positions, but he's running for governor of California and saying that, you know, California is going to divest from Israeli connections like Israeli bonds, which is a good position. So, you know, I'm wishing Butch well. It's very difficult in California. You got a bunch of Democrats with lots of money, a few Republicans with lots of money, and Butch with not a lot of money, but a good message in a jungle primary where the top two go to the general. And because there's so many Democrats, they could split the vote enough that you could have two right-wing Republicans in the final runoff, which means that, you know, Californians need to get rid of that, you know, top two primary system, which is terrible. And I know the Greens and the Peace and Freedom Party, I believe, maybe the Libertarians, they've got legal challenges to it, as well as trying to get legislative remedies. But that system's got to change because, you know, you could have a general election where majority of Californians by, you know, 2-1 would want some Democrat for governor, and they will end up with a choice between two Republicans because of this stupid electoral system of top two primary. It's, you know, to bring up another topic, you may have heard that Hannah Spencer won this by-election in the constituency of Groton and Denton, I think it's called, in near Manchester or in Manchester, England. She was the Green candidate. The Labor people were saying, oh, she's going to split the vote and the Reform candidate will win. But she won with 40% of the vote. Reform came in second with less than 30%, Labor third. And, you know, she's, if you haven't looked at her messaging, you know, find her victory speech. It really gives her working class sensibility and message really well. You know, she, and the canvassing they did in that campaign is the kind of thing Mamdani did to win the election. Really important for us as Greens to take on the moneyed interests who try to win elections by advertising from the top down. We can go beneath them at the grassroots. So why did I bring her up? Just as an example of what now Labor was saying we're going to spoil the election, but damn, Labor has for decades resisted the movement in Britain to go from winner-take-all single-member districts to proportional representation in their parliament. So if this did end up being the case where Greens and Labor split the vote and Reform got in, the far-right party, that's on Labor, because they won't, when they had the power, when they've had the power, would not move toward proportional representation. So, you know, every time they blame us for spoiling, we got to say, well, where you're the spoilers. In our case, it'd be the Democrats saying that. You're the spoilers because you won't go to proportional representation, which would end the spoiler problem. or ranked choice voting for single-member seats. Same thing, would end the spoiler problem. Now I was gonna put in, let me do that while, I'm gonna let Matt answer the next question while I get this link in for the Ukraine Solidarity Network statement. Justice Fee, hi Matt from Nader 2000 to Hawkins 2022, and on Solidarity. Okay, you're
Hey,
just,
Justice V, good to hear from you.
Calvin Stevens says abolish ICE. Wait, I'm in the wrong place.
What were you looking to comment on?
I'm looking for the Ukraine Solidarity Network website, which now that I think about it is right up on my priorities, should be. Now it's not, because when you want it to be there, it's not. So I think I know what the website is. Can't find the server because I didn't spell it right.
Isn't it ukrainesolidarity.org?
No, .us, I believe.
.us.
Here it is. Ukraine still stands. Okay, I'm putting a link in the private chat where Anna's going to put it in the public chat. So look for that in the chat. That's the statement from the Ukraine Solidarity Network on the occasion of the beginning of the 5th year of this damn war. There it is up. So I want to make sure we got that out before we finished up here. So any more questions? Aaron Ingebrigtsen. I don't think splitting the vote or spoiling the election is a real thing. Either earn my vote or fail. That is democracy. Yeah, but we have to realize that the winner-take-all election system sets it up that way, and a lot of people will vote lesser evil to stop the greater evil, and that hurts us who have to. We're trying to offer an alternative, and we may understand. And I've always voted, for the party on the left, irregardless of the spoiler dynamic. But it's real, and we have to. That's why we got to change the system and not just tell people to vote for us. Despite the spoiler dilemma. So let's work for ranked choice voting for single seat executive offices and proportional representation, proportional ranked choice voting for legislative bodies. And then the spoiler dynamic disappears. It's not something to worry about in other countries. Aaron Ingebrigtsen, I seriously wish you and Jill Stein were in the presidency instead. Well, for one thing for sure, neither of us would have taken us to war with Iran right now. And yeah, it's unbelievable we got Trump as president again. Richard Pink, repeal the Patriot Act, abolish ICE, dismantle Homeland Security. Yeah, civil liberties has got to be a top issue for Greens as we go forward.
It's 3:50. Do you want to answer? Do you want to answer the point about your debate with Dr. Stein, and she kind of used the Victoria Nuland quote as a smoking gun, so to speak? Is that worth elaborating, do you think, to kind of
I'd be happy to
give our viewers a common sort of talking point that says the Maidan was because of the Russians, basically, or because of the CIA?
because of the CIA. Yeah, man, I know a lot of people that were on the Maidan for that revolution, and they really get pissed.
Yeah.
when they're told they were CIA stooges. They said, when Victoria Nuland came out there with her sandwiches, they didn't even know she did it. And they weren't freezing their asses off there to get sandwiches from Victoria Nuland. Now, the thing that the people that want to say that there was a coup and not a democratic revolution in 2014 say, well, we got this tape recording of Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piat, the ambassador, talking about who they would like Yanukovych, the president, to nominate for prime minister. And they end up agreeing that the best guy would be Yatsenyuk. They didn't even know that Yanukovych had already asked Yatsenyuk, and Yatsenyuk said no. So it's not like they even knew what really was going on. And all they were talking about is how the U.S. would lobby Yanukovych. That discussion is not about overthrowing Yanukovych. It's about advising him on the prime minister they would like him to nominate. But the people that put that out there as a gotcha don't even give you that background. Yeah. Jill did that in the debate we had. It's frequent when you listen to these people that
Margaret Kimberly,
Margaret Kimberly, Jeffrey Sachs,
Scott Ritter.
Oh, Scott Ritter, yeah, he's the worst. They don't give you the context, and so it's a trope, and so Victoria Nuland had no. In fact, Nuland and Piat, the ambassador, they were trying to negotiate a settlement between Yanukovych and the protesters at Maidan Square, and they came out with something. I think it was February 21st, and the people rejected it. They said, we don't trust Yanukovych, we want him out. And so what Nuland is actually working for, the protests, the revolution rejected. And they don't tell you that. So, and there's a whole lot of nonsense about what happened and that is not the real history. Just finish that up. So they say, well, it was unconstitutional. Yeah. Well, Yanukovych fled the country. And the Constitution didn't have a laid out succession plan in that circumstance. So what the parliament did was meet, impeach, and remove Yanukovych, which is in the Constitution. And then they set up an interim president with elections 8 weeks later or 10 weeks later. And then there was a new president elected. So it wasn't, when I say it's a coup, what do you think of when a coup? You think of a military coup, a small group of military leaders taking over. It didn't happen in Ukraine. So, when you hear people say CIA-backed coup, those people either don't know what they're talking about or they're lying.
Is this still live even though we're after 4 o'clock?
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay, good. So Howie, I think, what about, can you give a brief and how Russia plays on fear, Americans' fear? Or is there something you can kind of share with our audience about the sort of Russian propagandistic playbook to prey on fear or other tools of manufacturing consent?
Yeah, the Russian narrative is if Ukraine doesn't capitulate, which means if NATO doesn't get Ukraine to capitulate, or the US doesn't, we may use tactical nukes. And that scares the hell out of people comfortably far away from the front lines where they're not facing Russian assault troops or drones and missiles every night. And, Russia is bluffing. They don't really want a war with NATO. They get their ass kicked and they know it. So the latest trope is they're saying Ukraine, what is it? France and the UK are going to give tactical nuclear weapons to Ukraine. They have no evidence for that. They're just asserting it. That's in Russian propaganda the last week. And that's to scare the hell out of people in the United States. So you get people saying, well, I think Ukraine should just capitulate to Russia's demands so I'm not affected by a nuclear war, which isn't going to happen. So they're trying to scare the hell out of people who, instead of being in solidarity with the victims of aggression, suddenly want to support the aggressor's demands that the Ukraine capitulate, thinking that'll save us from a nuclear war. But it won't.
And what about Dr. Yulia Yurchenko's sort of narrative, not narrative, but
Well,
I guess.
Yeah, Yulia Yurchenko is a Ukrainian political economist, one of the smartest women I've ever met, heard. And when she talks about this war, she gets right down to the bare bones. The last thing I heard her say was in one of these, online webinars or panel discussions we organized. And she really said we've got to take down the Russian narrative of an inevitable victory, because it's not true. And what the subliminal message is, well, we in the West should not support Ukraine because they can't win anyway. So we should get them to surrender. And the fact is, as this Ukraine solidarity statement called Ukraine Still Stands points out, in the last 3 years, Russia's constant assaults have only gained 1.5% of Ukraine's land over that whole period.
Okay.
It's a stalemate. And so, Ukraine can win, and Russia's in trouble, militarily, economically. And the most important point is, that idea, here's another one, Matthew O of the
Yeah.
Eisenhower Media Network and those old, CIA military types are saying we're neutral and we just want to negotiate it in. You can't be neutral between an aggressor and the victim of aggression. Otherwise, you're de facto tolerating the aggressor, and that's not an anti-war position, not a leftist position. It's a reactionary position, in my opinion.
And Howie, what about this, I sometimes call it the sort of podcast industrial complex? Jimmy Dore, Brianna Joy Gray, Tucker Carlson, these people that have these platforms, Joe Rogan, and they have these big platforms, but I think yet I've never really seen a Ukrainian on these platforms describe what's happening in this invasion. Is there anything that you or Ukraine Solidarity Network have experienced to reach out to them, or do they call the USN for information, since you're an American-based organization?
Well, the people you named, Jimmy Dore, Brianna Joy Gray, you mentioned Joe Rogan, I think.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, no, they don't contact us. I mean, we're not part of the podcast industrial complex. We're pretty grassroots, but we do platform Ukrainians. And it shows that, Jimmy Dore is anything but a leftist. He's a reactionary conspiracy theorist. Brianna Joy Gray, I would say, is a campist. She's not really interested in what grassroots Ukrainians have to say, or, the grassroots in other countries, frankly. And Joe Rogan, I mean, he's like the most successful salesman for his podcast. He was with Trump, and now he's not. At least we got a message here. Joe Rogan's losing sleep over Trump's actions.
Yeah. I even heard one of the Klitschko brothers offered to go on Joe Rogan, the heavyweight boxing champion of the world.
I think Zelensky did.
Now, Zelensky went on Lex Friedman.
Oh, yeah. And did he go on Tucker too? Tucker Carlson?
Zelensky, Tucker interviewed Putin, and so Tucker interviewed Putin, and Lex Friedman interviewed Vladimir Zelensky.
Yeah, well, if I volunteered to go on one of those platforms, they wouldn't have me. If, Klitschko does, they might.
I think he offered to go on Rogan, but Rogan said you have to be in Austin to be on the show or something. I don't know exactly, but that's what I heard through the Ukrainian grapevine.
Well, it sounds like BS to me. Video, like we're doing right now is not impossible. And, Joe Rogan should make an exception to get a a Ukrainian voice. Not that Klitschko is, I'm not a fan of Klitschko politically.
But he's a heavyweight champion, which kind of fits into the audience of Rogan.
Yeah, that's
He has a
true.
lot of boxers and karate and these Muay Thai people. So
Yep. You got a fan here,
Oh.
Michael Zilski.
hey, Mike,
You know him?
my brother. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
thank you.
All right. Well, we like to keep these to an hour. We've gone on an extra 10 minutes. Don't want to take up too much of your Saturdays. We'll be back next week. Given what happened today with the attack on Iran, I will try to get Frida Afari to come back on and inform us, particularly what progressive Iranians in Iran and in its diaspora are thinking and doing now on this, and how they understand what's going on and what the next steps are, for a good outcome for Iranians who want to, democratic rights and be integrated in the world economy. So many people aren't impoverished there. Big topic. So thanks everybody for being here. And like I said, every week, what you do makes a difference. And when you do it with other people in a group where you're talking things through, we're all smarter, we're all more effective. The burden is a little bit less on each of us because it's shared. So if you're not in a group, get in it and stay active because it does make a difference.
And I'm sure Howie learned this when you were in Ukraine. Slava Ukraine.
Yep, it means glory to Ukraine.
What do you say? Respond.
Well, glory to the heroes.
Well, how do you say it in Ukrainian?
My Ukrainian is, actually, we didn't say it that much.
You didn't say it back there?
No, I mean, I guess it was assumed.
Maybe it's more diaspora.
Well, and it's also probably more in a formal public event.
Okay.
And most of what I did was, small meetings and, with people in unions and progressive groups, environmental groups, feminist groups. So.
Well, Howie, you should have said Heroyam Slava as a response, just so for the record.
Okay, well, that's why you're here. Okay, everybody, have a good week. Stay active. Get your representatives to vote for that War Powers Act resolution, and we'll see where we are next Saturday.
Do pobачення.